What's up, my wizards? It's Dev. SBMTG. We like it of magic and all that stuff, catchphrases. I know some of you are here for them. Most of you are here for the cats, but a lot of you are here for Core Set 2021 spoilers, which is exactly what we're talking about today. I'm going to clean up all the spoilers that we haven't hit over the weekend yet so far, and I'm going to tell you that a lot of these aren't quite as hype as the first day of spoilers, but honestly, the first day of spoilers is a tough act to follow this time around. First day was crazy. Today, not as crazy, a lot of lower rarity stuff, but I've still got a lot to talk about, even with some of the commons and uncommons. There's a bunch of wrinkles and dimensions to them, so I don't have much time to talk, and I've probably blabbered on for too long already. Let's get to it. Now, there was some stuff today that wasn't super exciting, like Bad Deal, Jeskai Elder, Maleficent Scythe. Disney reference there? That's kind of cool. Maleficent Scythe is probably my favorite of these three cards, so I'm going to save that one for a second. First of all, Bad Deal is just that. 6 mana to draw 2. Everybody discards 2. Each player loses 2. I mean, maybe Commander playable, but 6 mana is so freaking much. Even with the each player clauses on this card, 6 mana is way too much. It is, in fact, a terrible deal. Now, Jeskai Elder, little reprint here, and it's not great. I mean, what can I really say about Jeskai Elder other than it's kind of okay and limited, but that's pretty much it. Now, Maleficent Scythe. Let me read this one to you. This is 1 and a black for an equipment that equips for just 1 mana, and it enters the battlefield with a soul counter. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 for each soul counter on Maleficent Scythe. Whenever a equipped creature dies, you put a soul counter on Maleficent Scythe. Now, I actually think this is really, really cool. I have heard a lot of people on the Reddits say that this would be cooler, flavor-wise even, if it, reaped souls from your opponent's creatures. I think it's just the opposite. I think it's, way cooler flavor-wise that this reaps the soul of its bearer. That's really, really cool, and it's more controllable. Your opponent might not always have creatures for you to kill. You might not always have removal spells to kill your opponent's creatures. So I think that this is much more controllable, and even outside of the limited environment, in something like the Cat Oven deck, for instance, eventually this is going to have 4 or 5 soul counters on it, no matter what you put it on. The creature's going to be enormous, right? So in a sacrifice deck, I could see something like this, but I really doubt that a sacrifice deck is going to have the slots for an equipment like this at the end of the day. I don't really see this seeing much standard play, but I do think it's a really cool artifact, and especially in limited, where, it's going to eventually give a creature +2/+2, +3/+3, and then literally every creature you play is really relevant to the end of the game. So I really like this as maybe a one-of in your limited decks, but I don't think it goes too much farther beyond that. I just really like the card in general. There's a couple more cards that I'm not sure they're really a step up, but at the very least they're a lateral step. We got Shipwreck Dowser and Lana War Visionary. Lana War Visionary is cute because not only did they combine the power toughness and all the abilities of Lana War Elves and Lana War Visionary, or Elvish Visionary, but they combine the names too. In a way, this is kind of a lazy card when you think about it. They just put 2 cards and slapped them together. That is literally all they did, and I really want to be excited about this, but the state of modern day Magic is such that I probably shouldn't be that excited about this card. I mean, we've got things like Euro, for instance, which are just 100 times better than this and probably keep this from seeing play. Even Risen Reef is 100 times better than this in most situations, I would imagine. But, at least it's got a good creature type and all that. We are long past the days of Rogue Refiner, where this was a really, really exciting looking card. We've just got cards that are even way better than Rogue Refiner, and Rogue Refiner got banned, but hey, we got Euro in this format, so I just don't really see this seeing too much play whatsoever, because, 3-cost mana dorks are usually bad. The draw card is good, but in the end, I really don't see this seeing much more play than a card like Cloudkin Seer, which is to say, fringe playability in a deck or two, but probably not actually that powerful of a card. That said, it is very likely one of the better green commons for limited play. Now, Shipwreck Dowser, I actually really like this a lot. This is 5 mana for a 3/3 Merfolk Wizard with Prowess, and when it ETBs, you return target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. So it's like Scholar of Ages, but it costs less mana, and I'm always down for that. You can blink this with a Thassa, or many different ways, I guess, of blinking creatures to bring back instants and sorceries. And I can't tell you how many times I've been building decks in the last year or so, and I've wanted an effect like this for a reasonable cost. Scholar of Ages is almost like a must reanimate creature where you can actually play this creature 5 mana is an awful lot, and it's probably priced out of real competitive play, but still, this is a very good enter the battlefield trigger that is insanely abusable. So once it's on the field, and you've got a Thassa or other ways to blink it, like Teferi's Time Twist or whatever, then suddenly, I think you've got a really solid creature out. But we got some way better stuff than that over the last couple of days, like Primal Might. This is X and a green for a sorcery, which kind of hurts, but it's still a neat card. Target creature you control gets +X/+X until end of turn, and then it fights up to one target creature you don't control. Now, when I first read this, I was like, it's probably not very good, but I've kind of come around on it since then. Like, first of all, it's just a strictly better Prey Upon. And Prey Upon's decent. It doesn't really see much standard play, it never has, but it is one of the better limited removal pieces in just about every environment that it's in, so this is at least that. But I said I wasn't going to talk too much about limited. I'm going to try and stick to that, because I think this card could be fringe standard playable. I think that I'd like it a lot more if it was, more like Howl from Beyond, and it was an instant, but if it were an instant, it might be like a little bit busted, to be honest. It would be very, very good as an instant. As it is, you can probably just spend 4 or 5 mana on this, take out a creature, and then get through with a big old attack step. If you've got a trample creature, suddenly this becomes amazing because you're just going to trample through for a bunch of damage, take out their biggest guy, and all of that looks really, really good. In most cases, I'd probably still rather play a card like Domri's Ambush or something, but at least this has some amount of playability, and I like too that your opponent doesn't have to have a creature out. You fight up to one target creature, so if you're playing against a control deck, your opponent doesn't have creatures or whatever, you can still use the pump spell on this to pretty good effect, and I could see a couple of decks wanting to do it. Mono green, Gruul both have trample creatures this goes really well with. They both need decent removals, so it's a possibility. And hey, in the mono green deck, you've got Surf Air and the Hinge Hammer if you wanted, so you can always just make your Surf Air and huge, kill one of their guys, get through, pump something else for whatever Surf Air's power is at the time. I don't know. It looks like there's some interesting applications for the card, but I'm not too sure it's going to actually see play at the end of the day. Actually, over the last few days, we've seen a few uncommons that I think are way better than the rare we just looked at, like Reign of Revelation, which I believe is a reprint from Modern Horizons, if I'm not mistaken. But this is 3 and a blue for an instant. You draw 3, and then you discard a card. So way back in the day, my buddy had a blue-black control deck that on our casual kitchen table was nearly undefeatable, it seemed like. And one of the key card draw pieces in that deck was Sift. In case you've never seen Sift, it's a pretty bad card because it's a sorcery, but you make Sift an instant, and suddenly Sift is a really, really good card. At instant speed, draw 3 for 4 is not bad in any way, and being able to discard a card can easily be turned into an upside. Just dump some with Jumpstart in there. Maybe you're fueling Escape, maybe you're reanimating stuff, maybe you can get the creature you discarded back with an Elspeth Conquers Death. There's a million reasons why discarding a card is not really a downside in a lot of ways. So draw 3, discard 1 at instant speed for 4 mana is more than playable. We've already seen Chemister's Insight and a bunch of other 4 mana instant speed draw 2s be playable over the last couple of years in Standard, and I think this is at least going to usurp Chemister's Insight. But even if it doesn't, and we have to wait until Chemister's Insight rotates, this will almost certainly see play afterwards. But I could see plenty of decks, wanting even to discard a card right now. So I think this is actually pretty powerful and standard playable day one. But speaking of reprinted uncommons, here's Rewind right here. This is 4 mana in case you haven't seen it. 2 and 2 blue for an instant, counter a spell, untap up to 4 lands. Can I go back in the day another time real quick? Well, I will, regardless of how you answered that question. But back in the day, when this was first reprinted, it could untap Tolarian Academies. And it was a very, very powerful card. Today, we don't have anything quite like that. We don't have Gia's Cradle or Tolarian Academies for this to untap. But we do have things, we've got Lotus Field in the format for this to untap. We've got various castles, probably the most important being Castle Vantris, obviously. And I think that just the interaction between this and Castle Vantris might be a huge deal. There are a lot of games that you play with your control deck where you can either counter a spell or you can activate Castle Vantris. And very often it's more worth it to counter whatever spell you're trying to counter, but then you don't get to scry up better cards. And this makes it to where you don't really have to make that choice anymore, right? You can just rewind and still activate your Vantris, which is an enormous deal. But, of course, this card has been met with a chorus of 4-mana counterspells are bad. And 4-mana counterspells are fairly bad, especially in today's Magic. not great, especially if you're on the draw. Rewind doesn't actually look anywhere near as good as it used to, but I don't think that makes Rewind a bad card, and I wouldn't be surprised if Control decks played a copy or two of this just because of all of the different interactions with tappable lands that we have in this environment. But here's a card that I missed the other day. This is Sumir, but the translation appears to be either Vanish or Purge. This is an instant for just 2 mana, 1 and a black, destroy target planeswalker or creature with converted mana cost 3 or less. Now, I actually talked about this card in my first preview season video that I did, but I ended up talking about it for like 4.5 minutes. So I cut that part entirely, decided I would just come back the next day and say, hey, this is extremely playable removal. And I don't really think that that's like a controversial statement. I just think this is an amazing piece of 2 mana removal that's going to see a lot of play until it rotates. That's really all I got to say. It's incredible. Let's get on to Fungal Rebirth right here. Another pretty powerful looking uncommon, but I don't like it as much as a lot of people seem to like it. This is 3 mana, 2 and a green for an instant. Return target permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. If a creature died this turn, you create 2 1/1 green Saproling creature tokens as well. Let me just say right off the bat, it's not Eternal Witness, y'all. So many people are like, yo, it's E-Witness. It's not. It's just not E-Witness. First of all, a creature dying is slightly harder to proc than you might think that it is. A lot of people are reading this like you just always get the 2 1/1s, and you don't. You just don't. A creature having to die is actually like kind of tough to pull off some of the time. But even so, instant speed, get a permanent card back isn't bad. It's not a bad card. I really want to clear up that it is an E-Witness, like E-Witness can be flickered or bounced or whatever, returned from your graveyard into play, and just repeating the into the battlefield trigger is a huge deal. Whereas you can't really do that on this card, so it kind of defeats the purpose of it sort of sideways even looking like an Eternal Witness. It's just not that. It really isn't. I think the instant speed probably does mean a lot on this card, and it might even be like really good in limited. I can see a lot of situations where you block and trade with one of their creatures on their turn when they attack in, and then you cast this EOT, you get your creature back that died, and you get 2 1/1s that put you like way ahead on board. And that seems like a blowout almost. Like I said, I'm not gonna talk too much about limited for the rest of the video, but I do think a situation like that is like really likely in limited and probably very good. I think it's a lot less likely in standard, but it's still a possible play line. I'm just not sure where this card is actually like worth the slot in a lot of decks that seem like they would want a card like this. I've heard some people say that like the Jund Sacrifice deck wants something like this. I will say it's really easy to proc the creature died this turn mode in Jund Sacrifice, and you get more sacrifice fodder, maybe you get a Mayhem Devil back. Like, all of that looks really good to me, but again, the deck has to find slots for this card, and right now that deck can barely find slots for main deck Korvold, so I really doubt it's going to be able to find slots for this card. Coming up next, it's rare time, y'all. It's Necro Mincha right here. It replaces Unmoored Ego. It's 3 mana, 1 and 2 black for a sorcery. Choose a card name other than a basic land card name. Search target opponent's graveyard, hand, and library for any number of cards with that name and exile them. The player shuffles their library, then creates a 2/2 black zombie creature token for each card exiled from their hand this way. Well, I like it a lot more than Unmoored Ego, for what that's worth. And it's worth a lot. I like Unmoored Ego a lot more than a lot of, like, competitive-minded players. Unmoored Ego kind of has a bad rap in the quote-unquote true competitive community. But actually, I've always liked cards like Unmoored Ego, and this is no exception, right? I think it's a great sideboard piece. And the downside on it is like way better than Ego, right? Ego, they get a card. Getting to draw a card if you get a card in their hand is actually a huge deal. Just giving them a 2/2, probably not as impactful as giving them a card in most situations. So I like that. But at the end of the day, it's probably just a sideboard piece that's not even as good as it's supposed to be now. They just banned fires. They just banned agents. Some of the, huge cards that people build entire decks around that would be really good targets for a card like this are banned now. So, I guess you could still name Winota, because I think people are still doing stuff with Winota, even though Agent of Treachery is banned. Just like any big 4 or 5 mana, the entire deck is contingent upon this card being drawn, For instance, if you're playing against Team Urrek, you could name Wilderness Reclamation or Expansion Explosion. And suddenly they have a much harder time winning the game if you're able to resolve this card. But all in all, this is mostly going to be a sideboard card. And even though I think it's way better than Unmoored Ego, not only because the downside is better, but because more decks can play it. You don't have to play blue to play this card. I still don't think that it's going to see all of the play in the world at the end of the day, no matter how much I like it. Let's go back to a couple of really exciting uncommons. Here's Tidal Whale to start off. This is 7 mana, 5 and 2 blue for a whale. And it's a 7/7. That's a big old whale. And creatures your opponents control get -1, -0. But here's the cool part. You can pay 1 and a blue and discard Tidal Whale from your hand to look at the top 2 cards of your library. Put one of them into your hand and the other into your graveyard. You'd think that a whale would be a little too big to effectively practice sleight of hand, but this whale's got some real prestidigitational powers, doesn't it? I just really wanted to say prestidigitation, but still, I like this card. I do, actually, kind of a lot, for a few reasons. First of all, it kind of reminds me of like the cyclable big old creatures from the last set from Ikoria. And some of those have seen play, some of them haven't. For the most part, they haven't. But I've really liked those creatures. This one kind of smacks of those, but you actually get to, like, instead of, it's not like Yadaro, where you actually get to leave this in your graveyard if you want to. I guess it's more comparable to like a Titan Authrax, right? Because you discard this, stays in your graveyard, you can reanimate it later. And it might actually be a really sweet reanimatable against like aggro decks, weenie decks, mono red, and all that stuff. Where it's also just like a huge creature that can win you the game. So I like all of that, but it helps out reanimator strategies in more ways than just being a reanimatable card. You also put one of the cards into your graveyard when you discard this. So you can get something, from the top of your library, throw it in your yard, reanimate it later. So this just does so much for reanimator decks. I really, really like this thing. And, it's a card draw spell that gets around counterspells, gets around Teferi, and I think that might be a huge deal for the next few months while Teferi's still in the format. So it's no Shark Typhoon or anything, but it is another way of effectively drawing cards around a Teferi on your opponent's turn. That might make a huge difference. So I think this card has a lot of like neat little niches that it fills, but at the end of the day, I think that it itself is also kind of niche playable, but the kind of fringe playable that I think we'll see in more than just one little deck here and there. I think this has a lot to do in the upcoming standard. Even if it's kind of a sleeper, maybe it has to wait on rotation or something, but it's just such an interesting card and it does so many little things that I think it's probably going to end up seeing some amount of play regardless. But let's take a look at one of my favorite cards of the entire set so far. This is Consecrated Veteran right here. 1 and a white for a 3/1 human warrior. You discard a card, you tap Consecrated Veteran, it gains indestructible until end of turn. First of all, I can't believe I didn't know this, but Guerrero means warrior in Spanish. That's the thing to know. So Eddie Guerrero's name is Eddie the Warrior. Just really sweet. R.I.P. Eddie Guerrero. But in any case, I like a lot about this card. A lot. It looks like a fixed Adanto Vanguard. When I said that on Twitter yesterday, I had somebody be like, it's not fixed, it's way worse. And it's like, that's what fixed usually means. If the original version is broken, what does fixed mean? It usually means strictly worse, right? And I think that's mostly what we have here, but this fills little roles that Adanto Vanguard couldn't fill, This just lets you pitch a card from your hand for free at instant speed whenever you want to. And that's actually really, really good in a lot of decks, whether you're playing Reanimator, or maybe they reprint Madness into the next couple of sets, and suddenly this card's stock goes through the freaking roof. But even without, good ways of using this to filter cards into your bin and then still have access to them, reanimation, whatever. Even without abusing the discard ability, I still do like the card. Just as an aggro 2-drop in white weenie deck. I've seen a lot of people say they'd rather discard a card than pay 4 life. Not me, sir. I mean, there's definitely a time where paying 4 life is no longer worth it. You have to get rid of your Adanto Vanguard. But the thing with Adanto Vanguard is that your opponent often lost a card by trying to remove it, whereas you didn't. Or they'd block it with a creature that dies to it. They lose their card. You don't. The way this works, you always have to lose a card. And in White Weenie especially, all of your cards are super precious because you have no real ways of drawing into more cards. So every card matters. Even the lands matter in those decks. So I could see the fact this cost you a card really making it way worse than Vanguard in a lot of ways. But at the same time, you make up for that by having a discard outlet that just lets you pitch cards whenever you want to, and there's a lot of reasons you might want to do that too. At the end of the day, though, being a not as good Adanto Vanguard is still a pretty good card in the decks that need something like this. And there's a bunch that do. You know, this gets past Deafening Clarion, Shatter the Sky, and a bunch of other sweepers. It also does pretty well in combat, so long as you've got cards to protect it. So I'm a huge fan of this, and although it's no Adanto Vanguard, it definitely does things Vanguard could not do, and I'm excited that the card exists. I guess let's look at the final card of the day so far, and that's Cryptic Masterpiece, a card that I like a lot more than most people do. This is 2 mana for an artifact. You can tap it to put a page counter on it and scry 1, or you can pay 2 and tap it and put a page counter on it to draw a card. Whenever Cryptic Masterpiece has 4 or more page counters on it, you exile it. When you do, you gain 4 life. Alright, so yeah, it's somewhere in between Treasure Map and Sunset Pyramid, but I think that's still a pretty decent card. In Standard, by the way, which is what I'm going to talk about mostly, but I also think this is at least decently playable in like mono-white commander decks that don't really have good ways to draw cards, especially if you already have an artifact theme, and a lot of white commander decks do have an artifact sort of theme. So I could see this going in those decks all day. I mean, I've played mono-white commander a few times because I've played Mtg the Lion. And let me just tell you that being able, I've sacrificed Mind Stone to draw a card in nearly every game with that deck I've ever played. So I could definitely see paying the 2 mana per turn to draw a card off of this, even just for 4 turns. That's kind of a lot. 4 turns is a lot in Commander. And even if you don't have the mana to draw cards, scrying is still it's still something. It's still pretty good. You scry during your upkeep before you draw. And it's really not bad in like mono-white commander games, but I'm not really here to talk about commander. Although again, I think this has a chance. There might be better options, but I think it has a chance. In Standard, control decks might end up playing this card. I mean, it's not really too much of an investment to get on the battlefield in the first place. It is sort of reminiscent of Treasure Map, which was a very played card when it was available in Standard. Although I think that the Treasure Map is like just miles beyond this, all things considered. But I also think that just, again, scrying for free right before you draw every turn is good. It's quite good. And if you have the extra mana at the end of your opponent's turn to draw a card, that's also amazing, right? That's good. 4 extra cards in a control deck is amazing. And the 4 life isn't bad either, because by the time you actually exhaust all the page counters on this, and it's a pretty short book, it's only got 4 pages, but by the time you do exhaust the page counters on this, gaining the 4 life might actually be like super welcome. As a matter of fact, you might even try to get all the page counters off of this as quickly as possible so you can gain the 4 life, depending on what you're playing against in your control deck. I think that a couple of mana is not a very high, investment to get started with this. And then if you don't counter spells during your opponent's turn, if you don't use your mana on removal or whatever, then suddenly you just get extra cards. And that's so good. Like, I really think this is way better than a lot of people are judging it, because a lot of people think this is a meh card, and I don't. I think this is actually, like, not an amazing card, but I think it's a little bit better than Fringe playable. Let me just put it that way. I don't think it's like one of the best cards we've seen in the set or anything, but I do think it's a lot better than most of the community is judging it. Not just content creators, but people on the ground on Reddit and stuff like that are just really not impressed by this card, and I like it a lot. If you can't tell, I'm really lobbying hard for it. That's because I think there's a lot more to this card than meets the eye at first glance. Oh, and by the way, yes, Soul Diviner exists. Soul Diviner is in Standard for the next few months, so knock yourself out. Effectively drawing 2 cards a turn for 2 mana. And that's not bad, but honestly, I really don't think you need to combo with this card for it to be good. I just kind of think it's a good card on its face that literally any deck can play, but especially the control decks might really like having access to a card like this. And one more thing I want to say is especially control decks that don't really play blue, which I don't think is like going to be super likely, especially while Teferi is in the format. I don't think we'll see too many of said control decks, but if you're in like Abzan or something and you don't really have too many ways to profitably draw cards, this might be worth playing as basically a treasure map. So I like this card. I've said that enough at this point, but I just really want to drive home the fact that I like this card more than you do, probably. Still no new cards. Still nothing. I've just reloaded Mythic Spoiler, and There are supposed to be cards today. I don't know why there aren't yet. Maybe the last couple of cards that have been spoiled are actually cards from like midnight last night and they count as today? Is that what's happening? I don't think so. I don't know why there aren't cards. But anyway, that's all I got today. But there are, if the schedule is to be believed, which is, if today's anything to go by, I'm not sure. But if the schedule's to be believed, there's going to be a buttload of cards tomorrow morning. So I'll be right back with you tomorrow with some more spoiler action for you. It appears as though I don't have an exclusive preview this season, which is I'm kind of bummed about, but I think I understand it. I think that there was a bit of a miscommunication last season, and I put out my exclusive preview a day late last season. Bastion of Remembrance. Apparently I didn't remembrance the correct date to put that card out. I think I was a day late on that, and I'm pretty sure I'm being punished for that, which I can't really be too upset about. That it makes sense. But hopefully I get one next season. And hopefully, even though I don't have an exclusive, you'll still come around for the rest of the previews this season, because there's a bunch, and this set looks amazing already. And it wouldn't surprise me if there were a bunch of like incredible cards still lurking in this set to be talked about. So make sure you come by, chill on the couch, and do just that, because I'll be doing it pretty much every day of spoiler season. So hit me up, you just check out the channel, come by the couch, or you can subscribe, hit the bell for notifications so you know exactly when I put videos out. Aside from that, like the video, do all that stuff. Consider joining the Patreon, $1 a month, and that'll help you vote on what decks we even do when we actually get into core 2021 standards. Pretty good deal for $1, I think. We have a lot of fun over on the Patreon. But aside from that, I'll leave a link in the description if you want to pre-order any of this stuff through TCG Player. Go ahead and do that. When you use that link to order stuff, helps out your dude. So if you want to help out your dude, do it. But if not, I'm not mad at you. I'm just glad that you're here. But I'll see y'all tomorrow with some more hot spoiler action. I've been Dev from the Place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind.